kudos to everyone. We've made it to the last plenary session of, I think, what's been a really excellent 2 days of meetings and learnings. And I'm very privileged to be able to introduce and chair the last plenary session of the meeting. This is from the Can Solve CKD network, entitled All My Relations. I'm just trying to see if we can get onto the first slide here. There we go. Perfect. Oh, went one ahead there, I think. All My Relations, a roadmap to embody cultural competency and Indigenous engagement in kidney research network. I'll come back to one slide here. Apologies, this is my fault. I do want to, again, pause and just, again, reiterate a territorial acknowledgement of where we are right now in the context of the meeting in general and this session in particular, to acknowledge that we are again gathering on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations. And we've heard some other reflections during territorial acknowledgements, and I would just echo that we have learned from elders and wisdom keepers in the past and present. And I think, as we'll hear today, we have some of the future on the stage to be sharing with us this afternoon as well. With that, I'd like to introduce our three speakers. We have our first speaker is Jocelyn Jones. Jocelyn is Can Solve CKD's Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council Coordinator. She is First Nations and a proud member of the Shoal Lake 40 in Kenora, Ontario on her mother's side, and Ukrainian European on her father's side. She was born and raised on the beautiful and unceded territory of the Syilx Nation in Vernon, BC, and currently lives in Kelowna, BC. She holds a degree in Indigenous Studies from the University of British Columbia and a Criminal and Social Justice Diploma from the Okanagan College. Jocelyn previously worked in the nonprofit sector as an outreach community support worker. Jocelyn brings her personal experience in health advocacy and has a passion for Indigenous health and wellness to support Indigenous voices. Our second speaker is Catherine Turner. Catherine identifies as a Red River Métis woman whose family originates from the historic Red River settlement in Manitoba. She has worked with the Can Solve CKD since 2016. Catherine has a bachelor's degree in professional communication, a graduate certificate in Indigenous public health, and is a certified Indigenous coach and a certified trauma-informed coach, and is in the process of completing her International Coach Federation certification. Catherine is the Indigenous Liaison Manager for the network. She also holds the position of Senior Research Coordinator for the BC Kidney Check project, delivered in partnership with First Nations Health Authority. As an Indigenous Liaison Manager for the network, she's responsible for brokering and maintaining meaningful and authentic partnerships with Indigenous communities, organizations, elders, knowledge keepers, and Can Solve CKD. Her work guides network members and project teams in ensuring culturally safe and respectful engagements and implementation and evaluation of programs. She's committed to amplifying Indigenous voices within the network and to advancing the inclusion of Indigenous ways of knowing and being throughout the network's activity and work. Our third speaker is Craig Settee. Craig is Nehinau, Swampy Cree, and Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and Scottish. He was born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He is a citizen of the Fisher River Cree Nation with family ties to the Dauphin River First Nation. Craig is a living kidney donor to his brother and recently celebrated the 11th transplant anniversary in October of 2023. Craig has over 2 decades of experience as a Oshish, I apologize in advance for my mispronunciations, I'm trying, Oshishbewis, which is a helper to traditional knowledge holders and elders, which has formed his passion to serve community and advocate Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing in his circles of influence. He has several years of experience working as a cultural support worker, an action therapist, and community organizer. He holds a bachelor's degree in interurban in urban inner city studies and conflict resolution from the University of Winnipeg. Craig currently works as the Cultural Competency Manager at the network, which involves implementing, evaluating, managing the Indigenous cultural competency training work. He currently resides on Coast Salish territory in Kikekweme, which I should probably be able to say better because that is actually also known as Vancouver. I will hand over to the team. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, everybody. Our next slide here is just to go over disclosures. As you heard, I was born and raised in Winnipeg. Well, we have no disclosures, and my other disclosure is, yes, it is Winnipeg Jets medallion here. So all you Canucks fans, take it easy on me. No disclosures, and I just wanted to go over our learning objectives before we move forward. And so we have here, our first one is to introduce the 6 R's of culturally relevant Indigenous engagement practices. Secondly, we also want to help learn about a model of Indigenous patient partner engagement, leadership, and governance within the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council at the CanSolve CKD network. And thirdly, to help everyone understand and apply practices for involving Indigenous elders, knowledge keepers in research from the Wabishke-Bijigoskanj learning pathway. And with that, I'll ask Catherine to come up and speak a little bit more about the background of the network.
Hi. Ooh, that's pretty loud. CanSolve CKD network is one of 5 chronic kidney disease research networks established through the Canadian Institute for Health Research Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research. Phase 1 of the network was launched in 2016 with a targeted end date of 2022. In light of delays and setbacks caused by COVID, we were given a year extension to 2023. We've had an overlap of phase 2 work that started in 2023 with a proposed end date of 2027. The CanSolve CKD is a national network that brings together kidney patients, researchers, healthcare providers, policymakers, kidney donors, and caregivers. Jocelyn?
Hello, everyone. Bonjour and welcome. I'm grateful to be here today, and thank you, Dr. Copland, for starting us off in a good way. As mentioned, my name is Jocelyn Jones, and I'm the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council Coordinator with CanSolve CKD. So when looking at what guides our work at CanSolve, we look at Indigenous and overall healthcare priorities. And when looking at chronic kidney disease, 1 in 10 Canadians are diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, and 1 in 3 First Nations adults are diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. So those statistics speak for themselves. We also acknowledge the historical, modern, and institutional experiences and stories of racism, which is still very active within the healthcare system. And to address this, CanSolve has embodied a culturally safe approach when looking at research in chronic kidney disease, of which does significantly affect Indigenous people and communities. So Indigenous self-determination within research is essential for addressing health inequities. So as a network, we have discovered the benefits in advancing Indigenous self-determination and leadership through engaging with Indigenous patient partners and health professionals. So I just wanted to highlight this photo that was taken here at our annual general meeting in Halifax on the territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This was really exciting and important, especially after COVID and connecting in person, and after many, many Zoom meetings through that time period. Next, I was going to talk about CanSolve and how we have 2 governing bodies. As you can see at the center of the picture, we have our Patient Governance Council and the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council. Both councils are involved in various network activities, which include sitting on the Research Operations Committees. Our co-chairs of IPERC currently sit on the steering committee and are there to ensure knowledge translation and mobilization, and that it has that representation of Indigenous voices. And within our leadership team, we have 2 members on that committee from IPERC. I say IPERC, just it's shorter than saying the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council all over again, because that's a mouthful of words. And we also have non-voting members from collaborative organizations that support Indigenous people and communities. So we also collaborate and work with the Kidney Foundation, as you can see at the top of the steering committee, and the Canadian Society of Nephrology, who is also on that committee. So within every committee, we do have that patient representation and guidance. Again, here's another photo of our patient governance circles who was also gathered in May in Halifax on the Mi'kmaq territory in Halifax. And as we move into phase 2, we really want to advance innovative kidney care solutions to help Canadians affected by chronic kidney disease. So the second phase of CanSolve aims to move research findings into real-world care to affect change. So the 9 projects from phase 1 will focus on sustaining and scaling up, spreading the knowledge of their research across Canada. And the goal is to use this knowledge to improve patient care by applying it to practice. Our goal is to change the culture of research, is to mobilize new findings in enhancing Indigenous cultural competency, principles of equity, diversion, and inclusion, and accessibility. We're also working to create new resources and infrastructure to enhance Canada's leadership in kidney research. And as we move into phase 2, our focus shifts to mobilize these and other innovations while implementing them into healthcare policy and practice onto a national scale. Okay, so moving more into the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council, known as IPERC. So it began its formation in 2015 and exists to guide the conduct of CanSolve's activities and sharing the unique experiences and aspects of patient-oriented research that involves First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. This included responding to the needs and concerns that are significant to the health and wellness priorities of Indigenous people and respecting that Indigenous cultural traditions exist outside of mainstream health research. So we are also guided by the various health needs in which affect overall Indigenous communities. So the purpose of IPERC is to facilitate that meaningful engagement in kidney research across Canada. Within our council, we currently have 15 members, which Catherine was mentioning. We have Indigenous patient partners, caregivers, researchers, health practitioners, community leaders, and knowledge keepers. The engagement process of forming and sustaining IPERC has been identified recently in a paper we recently published in 5 stages. So the building and maintaining of relationships, the consulting with Indigenous scholars and knowledge keepers. This was particularly important at the formation of it. Setting priorities and decision-making processes, so that notion of nothing about us without us. Strengthening relationships by inviting our council to events, conferences, to do presentations, and ensuring we have core principles that are clean and continue to guide our work, such as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So at the heart of what we do is that relationship building, especially with community-based organizations, funders, and patient partners across Canada. So we exist to create a safe space of sharing of personal stories, which allows others to join the journey we are on. And the sharing of stories is what gives us a voice to address successes and inequities we've all experienced. So IPERC is mandated to ensure that the Indigenous patient partner voices are supported, which includes that connection to research and current kidney education being done, specifically projects involved in networks activities. This also takes into account the inclusion of patient partner voices and the development of these resources, which supports patients and researchers to maintain culturally respectve engagement. So for example, a resource developed by our network with the involvement of IPERC is the Wabishki Bijiguskanj Learning Pathway. Craig's gonna share more about that really soon. Next, I just wanted to highlight and share two of our members of IPERC and their involvement. Dr. Evelyn Voyager is an elder of the Kwak-Ewok Nation and an elder advisor to the CanSolve CKD network. Dr. Voyager is a registered nurse with a PhD in psychology. She has worked extensively in community and hospital-based healthcare in Alberta and British Columbia. She has worked with the Indian Residential School Society, where her work focus was on supporting former students healing from trauma or residential schools. She's an educator who has taught and developed nursing curricula at the University of Victoria and North Island College. Dr. Voyager has dedicated her life to transforming Indigenous healthcare across Canada. She's also raised awareness about the systemic and institutionalized racism faced by Indigenous people long before this was in the public eye. She had the courage to speak out when there was not many people in the nursing profession, taking action to reduce stigma and oppression faced by Indigenous people. Dr. Voyager remains on as a knowledge keeper to IPERC and within our learning pathway. And Dr. Malcolm King is a member of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. Dr. King is a researcher at the University of Saskatchewan and joined the Department of Community Health and Epidemiology in October 2017. He was the scientific director of Saskatchewan Centre for Patient-Oriented Research, and he continues to teach and research Indigenous health with a focus on wellness and engagement. He remains on as a knowledge keeper advisor to IPERC, the Learning Pathway, and CanSolve's leadership team. So we're so grateful to have these amazing members share and guide our work, and I just wanted to highlight how they have affected change in research and culturally change in research. So this brings me to explain the importance of ceremony when cultivating kinship and building respectful engagement with Indigenous people. The CanSolve CKD network has embedded various ceremonial events to facilitate and create a safe space for Indigenous peoples. Through phase 1 and now into phase 2, we have welcomed and support ceremony. We hosted a name-in ceremony for our Wabishki Bijiguskanj Learning Pathway, the sharing of traditional dance and songs, blanket ceremonies by engaging on an emotional and intellectual levels to understand the impacts of colonization, smudging for connection and spirit, tobacco offerings as a sign of asking for assistance in a respectful way, sweat lodges and cedar brushings facilitated by elders and knowledge keepers in the local area. These Indigenous ceremonies enhance knowledge translation and Indigenous health and wellness. Importantly, these ceremonies are also training opportunities for all of our network members to engage in Indigenous ways of doing, knowing, and being. Relationship building is ceremony from an Indigenous perspective, and as Dr. Wilson says, Indigenous research is the ceremony of maintaining accountability to relationships. Relationships don't just shape Indigenous reality, they are our reality. Thank you. I'll pass it back to Craig.
Awesome. Thank you, Jocelyn. I know we've been sitting for a little while, so one thing I wanted to do while we're talking about ceremonies is close our eyes for a moment. And I want you to roll your shoulders backwards 5 times. I want you to roll your shoulders forwards 5 times. And I want you, if you can, to lift your arms up to the sky. In my culture, they tell us that we come from the stars because we're all made up of those molecules and we come from stardust. And so while your hands are raised, I want you to remember your ancestors that are above, below, and all around us. And they're in those stars, they're in the cosmos. And I want you to move your fingers, your hands, and just call them down to you to reflect on what you've taken from this time together over the past few days. And I want you to remember those ancestors that come before you, those ancestors that are with us now, who are ancestors in the making, and those ancestors that are to come. And then I want you to open your eyes and bring them down. Let me glitch. So that was a little off script for me, but I just felt like we needed to move and shift some energy. And I think that's really what ceremony is all about, is moving that energy. And we're talking about health and wellness of our kidneys, but we've also heard a number of times, or at least I've heard a number of times, that we also have to focus on the treatment of the whole person who we are working with to make better. And so just wanted to talk a bit more about ceremony continued from Jocelyn as well. And that this image that you see here on the screen is an image that was drawn by an individual named Sam Brad, who came to an event that we had with some knowledge keepers. And he did a really great job at capturing a number of the discussions that we had during our time together. And in the center of that picture is the logo of the learning pathway, Wabishke Bijigoskanj. And those colors that you see flowing out from it are the colors that come with that name. And the importance of that was that ceremony was utilized to find that name, to find those colors. And all that work has come to network and probably comes to most organizations who work with Indigenous people as well. It comes from our Indigenous ways of knowing. So if you don't have Indigenous people involved in your work, then it's likely that Indigenous ceremonies won't take place within it. So that's one thing that I've been grateful for, is that there has been a number of ceremonial actions that have taken place and have been guided by IPERC and IPERC members. And the other thing I wanted to share in this image is right below the logo, there's 4 points that, and they read, I don't know if you can read them, there's pretty small letters, but sharing knowledges, connecting with purpose, help others, and keeping the circle strong. And kind of just below that, there's also a string that says resurgence. And those are important for my next slide, because we have a circle here that shares a little bit about foundational teachings of the learning pathway. And an Indigenous way of knowing, doing, and being is often cyclical in nature. So hence this depiction of a circle here. It again connects us to ceremony. Where I'm from as well, there are many lodges that are in the form of a circle. Jocelyn alluded to, sweat lodge ceremonies, but there's also, we call it in Cree, we call it a migawap. Many of you might know it as a teepee. And so like that's used in a circle. Those are places that we've lived. And I know many people that still utilize those as well when we're at ceremonies. That's what they'll bring to ceremonies to spend, that time together as well. And our Sundance ceremonies are also built in a circle. And so this image shares a little bit about an Indigenous way of knowing, doing, and being, and living. And so that's why, for me, it's important to utilize this circle. Sometimes people call it a medicine wheel. I often like to just call it circle work, because it's also part of our sharing circles when we get together and often do a lot of our healing work in that way as well. And so these 4 colors of the circle as well are also part of the colors of the name, Wabishke Bijigoskanj. But also these 4 directions can also represent phases of life, our time as infants, as children, our time as youth, our time as adults, and our time as elders and knowledge keepers. And so in this picture here, they're represented as 4 L's: looking, listening, learning, and leading. And initially, CanSolve had a tagline that had the 3 L's in it: listening, learning, and leading. And when the learning pathway name was being developed. The elder who named the pathway, his name's Dan Thomas, he said that looking was missing from that piece. And I think in talking about research a lot, observation is probably one of the most important parts of the research. And so I thought that that was a fitting addition to that circle and make it complete. So next, I'll talk a little bit about the learning pathway. So it was designed to enable research team members to build culturally safe, competent, and respectful partnerships with Indigenous peoples, Indigenous communities in health research. And so I'll just go through the learning markers on the pathway. So the first one was also named by a knowledge keeper within the network, Latash Nahani. And he called it Supporting Each Other's Journey, and it's a land acknowledgement learning series. So there's four webinars that focus on different perspectives of doing land acknowledgements. There's settler perspectives. There's also perspectives from knowledge keepers, perspectives from Indigenous people as well from a few different territories who share their experience and knowledge about it. Next, there's a Kairos blanket exercise. I'm sure many people have taken part in Kairos blanket exercises, but it's a really good way to learn about the dispossession of lands from Indigenous nations across what is now called Canada. Next on that pathway is Sanyas Indigenous Cultural Safety Training. Again, another training that was named, and it's named for one of the nations out here as well has named it Sanyas. I can't remember exactly what that name recalls, but I think it's important to create those identities with Indigenous trainings. And it's an online training as well that takes about 8 hours to complete. And it's a really great training to do. Next on there is a webinar series that Dr. Malcolm King speaks to Indigenous research ethics and protocols. And he has a lot of really great insight in that webinar series to share. And so I encourage people to take a look at it. Next on there is something I'll talk a little bit more as well in some upcoming slides. It's a Knowledge Keepers in Research guidebook and video series. And so I'll save that one for the next slides to chat more about. After that is First Nations Principles of OCAP. So it's about data sovereignty, data collection, and data usage with First Nations data. So ownership, control, access, and possession of Indigenous data is important. And I think especially in kidney health, to have more data that is First Nations, Métis, Inuit identified as well, so that we can see how it's affecting the different communities of Indigenous nations across our country. Next to that is our resource page. So it's called the Cultural Competency Knowledge Bundle. And it's encouraged people to take a look at that to see more information, articles, podcasts, videos, multimedia about cultural competency. So diving in a little bit more about the knowledge keepers and research work. So we initially had done 11 interviews with the knowledge keepers from several provinces in the country from 2018, 2019. And after those interviews, we had also gathered with the IPERC Council shortly thereafter and developed themes from those interviews with the knowledge keepers. And the themes you see up here on the screens are the ones that came through with those interviews from the knowledge keepers. And so you'll see there's essential foundational teachings, there's preparations to meeting with the knowledge keeper, the ask, pretty important one, acknowledgement and protocol, knowledge, who's a knowledge keeper, and relationship kinship. And so within this guidebook, there's also information in an appendix that relates to providing honorarium. Often people aren't sure maybe how much to provide to a knowledge keeper, so there's some guidelines around that. There's also guidelines around inviting knowledge keepers to either participate or speak or conduct a ceremony at your events. How to do some of that, and as well as the other important part of supporting people traveling to any meeting is expenses as well. If there's travel expenses or hotel expenses, that those can also be covered by us when we're inviting knowledge keepers to come and participate in our work. So next here, I'll share briefly about this slide, which again, graphic by Sam Brad. And so in addition to the guidebook, I mentioned a video series, and it was a part of the initial plan. And as I've heard from some of the other sessions over the past 2 days, there's often COVID considerations. And so COVID also affected some of this work where we weren't able to gather in person. And so the video series was on hiatus for a short bit, but we were able to gather with the Knowledge Keepers in November of last year and film interviews with them based on the guidebook questions as well. And the reason that we wanted to do a video series with them as well is because we know the Knowledge Keepers are getting older. They're not going to be here physically with us forever. And to be able to have videos where we hear directly from them, we see their faces, we're also able to ensure that the legacy of their teachings can live on, and we can share that, within our network, but also with their families, with their communities as well. And so I think that's a really important part of developing videos with Knowledge Keepers. And with that, I will move on to the next slide and just ask for the video to be played.
Ani, I'm Malcolm King. I'm a member of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm privileged to be a member of the Knowledge Keepers in Research Circle at CanSolve CKD. I'm here to introduce this video series on the work of the Knowledge Keepers in Research at CanSolve CKD.
Anin, Bojo, Ogene Quedgus Nikaz, Nipsing Don Jaba, Deshani and Dayang, Megasado Dem. That is my spirit name, and it's Rosewoman, and I'm from Nipsing First Nation, and I belong to the Eagle Clan, and I live 3 hours north of Toronto in Ojibwe territory. My other name is Dot Bokash Kennedy.
Gila Tesla, Nugwa Am Gilgilishila, Gaitlaha, Jawa de Eno. Hello, I'm Evelyn. I am from the tribe of the Zawadeno people of Kingcome Inlet, BC.
Osiem, Tanoya, Tanoan Siam, and Siaya, Siyoyakwa. The name that I carry is Latash. I'm from the Squamish Nation. My English name is Maurice Nahene.
Niogabwik Indigenous Kas Masquat Nitotem, Ogijitakwe Indigenous Kas, and my English name, birth name, is Myra. I bring you my first two public names, Niogabwik, which is the woman that sits at the center for directions, and Ogijitakwe, that name means a woman with good heart. And my kinship, our clan, as they call them, is the bear, the Muskwa, or the Makwa, and she is a keeper of peace and justice.
That means Thunderbird Woman, and I come from the Coactos First Nations, Treaty 4 in Saskatchewan. My name is Lillian Fable Daniels. I now live in Vancouver for some 37 years. I acknowledge that I am a visitor on this territory of the Coast Salish people, and I appreciate their generosity, allowing me to live in this, on their territory.
My name is George Lalaberty. My language, they call me Essany. I'm from Isle Cross. We work out of Saskatoon right now.
My English name is Mary Wilson, and my ancestral name is Ogamake Bemitet Nayeskanawa, and I'm kin to the wolf, and I live born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
My name is Violet. My home base is Calgary for the past few years. My grassroots is from northern Alberta, I don't want to say Cold Lake because my relatives will say, no, you say Hatwe. Hatwe Chotwe, meaning in English, it's land of the big fish.
CanSolve CKD is a research network devoted to bringing the patient and community voices into research. It's part of Canada's strategy for patient-oriented research. For Indigenous people, that means not only patients and families, but communities, and having their voices come into what's important in research. The knowledge keepers are an important part of CanSolve CKD. They reflect the important knowledge in many different ways: traditional knowledge, ceremonial knowledge, historical knowledge of our communities and how this affects people's health and wellness, and in particular, kidney wellness. One of the priorities of CanSolve CKD is the Wabishku Bijiko Skanj learning pathway. It's a learning modules that are designed to increase the competence of researchers in working with Indigenous peoples. Listening and learning from Indigenous peoples is a very important part of working and building relationships with Indigenous communities. In this video series, we'll hear from knowledge keepers about their experiences and their abilities to build relationships with researchers to deal with the important issues that communities face.
Awesome. So I'll pass it over to Catherine next year to share.
Thanks, Craig. Two-eyed seeing. The gift of multiple perspectives, a conceptual framework coined by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall in 2004 for unifying knowledge systems. It is described as learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledges and ways of knowing, and to use both these eyes together for the benefit of all. Within the network, we are guided by TRC calls to action related to health. TRC call to action number 18, we acknowledge the impact of historical traumas on the health of Indigenous peoples. Call to action number 19, we are working to close the gaps in health outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Call to action number 24, we have ongoing cultural competency trainings for research team members to cultivate more cultural safety and humility. Article 23 of the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples states that Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for exercising their right to development. In particular, Indigenous peoples have the right to be actively involved in developing and determining health, housing, and other economic and social programs affecting them, and, as far as possible, to administer such programs through their own institutions. I'd like to introduce you to the 6 R's of culturally relevant engagement. This is another graphic illustration by Sam Brad. So within the CanSolve CKD network, we've adopted a framework of the 6 R's of culturally relevant engagement. This framework is used by project teams as a guide to ensure that these principles of engagement are being carried out in their planned engagement with Indigenous peoples and communities. What are they? Respect. Respect is to acknowledge that you are on Indigenous lands. Respect that Indigenous peoples and communities are diverse in their language, culture, protocols, spiritual practices, and ceremonies. Respect that Indigenous peoples know what is needed to be successful. Relevance. It is important to invite participation from Indigenous peoples and communities versus imposing it. Is your work project a priority for the community at this time, or are there more pressing needs for them to attend to? Incorporate and promote Indigenous knowledge, beliefs, values, practices, medicines, and models of health and healing into all health and wellness services and programs that serve Indigenous peoples. I want to acknowledge and express gratitude for the cultural teachings by Chief Rakalma this morning as well. So that's one of the ways that we're talking about as well. Reciprocity. Practice active living. Active living, yes, of course, and active listening so that all voices are heard and understood. Include principles of circle work, such as two-eyed seeing and reciprocal learning. Be open-minded to cultural diversity and showing kindness in words and actions. Look for opportunities to give back, power sharing. Relationships. Establishing relationships will take time and effort. Learn how to become a good ally and a partner with Indigenous peoples. Allyship is the active, consistent, and arduous practice of unlearning and re-evaluation in which a person in a position of privilege and power seeks to operate in solidarity with a marginalized group. Reflection. Treat others as you would like to be treated. No judgment, heart to heart, human to human. Be humble in your approach. Reconciliation. Learn the truth. Reconcile and take action. Support Indigenous goals. Respond to the TRC calls to action, in plain sight report and recommendations, UNDRIP, DRIPA, and other guiding reports and recommendations on how to work effectively with Indigenous peoples. What can allies do? Acknowledge, recognize, respect, engage, listen, co-resist, ask, credit, honor, lift up, learn, show up, and upstand. I would like to share an example of how this framework and guiding principles is shaping research projects within the network. 2 projects in Calgary, the Approach Project and My Kidneys, My Health, were seeking to partner with Indigenous communities to expand on the work that they are undertaking. We introduced them to Knowledge Keeper Violet March, who you saw in the video. After a number of culturally informed and culturally safe in-person meetings with Violet, they invited her to serve as the Knowledge Keeper advisor to assist with their Indigenous community engagement. From this relationship, a recently diagnosed and newly recruited Indigenous patient partner, Marina Loth, and both are pictured with the Calgary team, have joined those 2 teams. Both Violet and Marina will liaise between Indigenous communities and the project teams in Alberta. This is how meaningful Indigenous engagement is carried out. I'll now pass it to Craig.
Good thing I have long legs.
I was gonna say, you're tall.
Thank you, Catherine, for all that information. And I know we're nearing our time here, so we just wanted to, again, reiterate our learning objectives for our session here about introducing 6 R's of culturally relevant engagement practices, learning about the Indigenous Indigenous peoples' engagement in research, council, as well as understanding and applying practices to engage with Indigenous knowledge keepers as well. And so with that, I think that kind of concludes our presentation. So we'd just like to say miigwech, egose, thank you. And I know here on the coast it's haichka, so haichka to everyone for today. And with that, our contact information, and we'll do some question and answer. So I'll pass it back to Mike here.
Yeah, I'd like to start by thanking all the members. That was really thought-provoking, and the 6 R's, I think, are an important take-home for us. Lots to ponder on there, so thank you for that. We do have some questions here. So the first one that came in, can you expand on the Indigenous control of the data, how that works within the healthcare system, I guess both from a research perspective as well as from a research as well as a clinical perspective, and if there's challenges you've seen in terms of that?
So I can take that question because in addition to being the Indigenous Liaison Manager for the network, I also coordinate the BC Kidney Check project in partnership with the First Nations Health Authority. And within that work, I have engaged thus far with 16 First Nations communities in British Columbia. And so how the data, like who holds the data, how that works. So we not only have a partnership with the First Nations Health Authority, we also partner with the communities themselves. The only information that leaves the community is the number of individuals who have been screened and in which category they presented in. So there's 4 categories: no risk, low risk, medium risk, and a high risk. And no other information about the individual leaves community. And then in addition to that, we, the first step of meeting with an individual before they are screened, we go through a consent form. Within that consent form, it's really important that the individual understands that we do follow OCAP principles, as was mentioned: ownership, control, access, and possession. And so the individual carries the power throughout the entire process. If at any point in time they want to stop the screening process, that's completely up to them. So, yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. A really good question. This is directed to all the speakers. Thank you for sharing the extensive body of work. What are each of you most proud of in the journey so far, and what's your hope for this audience? What are you most proud of the journey so far?
Well, I'll say for me, what I'm most proud of is being able to be up on the stage after initially being involved with CanSolve as a patient partner. So just the capacity that I've been able to build through kind of engaging with IPERC, engaging with some of the project teams within the CanSolve organization. I think that I'm proud for the opportunities that had come my way to be there. And, I think being in rooms with a lot of researchers, a lot of doctors, a lot of people, when you're a patient partner, there's a lot of imposter syndrome that comes in. You feel like maybe you don't know as much as some of the colleagues in the room, and maybe you don't on the scientific level. But I think for me, coming in as an Indigenous person as well, there's a lot that folks who are in the same circle who might not know about the way that I do things in my community or the way I do things as an Indigenous person. And so just, being able to share that experience, my life experience with folks in the network has probably been the most rewarding for me.
Well, there are so many things that I am proud of in doing this work. The knowledge keepers in research, so that entire process was so rewarding. And, even when I watch the video now, I think about how blessed we all are to have a relationship with those knowledge keepers. and to have them supporting our work. Another thing that I am very grateful and proud of is incorporating a two-eyed seeing approach within network activities. And it really is being taken to heart. And as was indicated in the example of the Calgary team, like they're taking it seriously and putting that to work, which is incredible. I didn't speak so much about the BC Kidney Check project, which is one of the network research projects, but I'm so incredibly proud of that project as well, and working in partnership, amplifying Indigenous people's voices, building capacity for Indigenous peoples within their community to take ownership and self-determination around their own health care. So, and also working with an incredible Indigenous initiatives team. I think we make a really cool trio. Yeah, thank you.
Well, to start, I'm fairly new with the network. I've been here for about a year now, and this year has gone by so quick, and I think I'm really grateful for all the relationships that I build and the amazing people that I've had the opportunity to meet, and being able to speak about all of the work that has gone into CanSolve and building respectful and really culturally relevant engagement with Indigenous people, and specifically the knowledge keepers. My first week of work, I was there with the knowledge keepers videos, and it was so amazing sitting in that room. I couldn't believe I had the opportunity to sit there. So I'll also echo what Catherine has shared, is that the network's really embodied the self-determination of Indigenous people and knowledge, and working within a team, a really supportive team, and our Indigenous initiatives team is really awesome. So thank you.
Thank you. I know we're almost at time, but I think the other question that came in deserves to be asked. Regarding reconciliation, you mentioned take action. What actions would you like to see us as the renal community in BC to take moving forward?
Sure. It's funny that question came up because I was just thinking we're at time and I didn't get to cover one thing that I wanted to share.
Did you put it in? Maybe you put it in.
Yeah, maybe I did. You never know. But one thing I wanted to share was treatment. The word treatment. I know we're talking a lot about the scientific side of treatment for the individual with kidney disease or being a living donor and recovering from that, or the caregiver. And so I think for me, with these experiences and with what we've shared today too, is we've also heard land is medicine. A lot of different things are medicine. And I wanted to point out that you are the medicine as well. And how you treat people is really the most important treatment, I think, for me, that you can give. And that's the action that I would like to see, is talk a lot about anti-racist Indigenous education. And so I think that is my action, is to be anti-racist and to include that in your treatment of anybody that you're working with.
From my perspective, I think it's really important to learn the truths, and there are many horrific stories, and can be quite challenging and difficult to learn those stories and about the history of Indigenous peoples across this country. And then look for opportunity to develop relationships with Indigenous peoples, and in building and fostering that relationship, you'll learn, how can you support those individuals and or communities. There's no shortage of ways to help and support. Thanks.
When reflecting on the takeaway for today, I think one word's coming to mind is kindness, and kindness in this room, and take the kindness of the learnings and ask those important questions, or if you're not sure, just ask those questions and like lead with kindness. It can go a long way. So yeah, I'll end with that.
Thank you. With that, I'll close the session, and I will really thank the three of you for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us today, and I think a lot for us to take away, but thank you so much. And with that, I'll hand over to Naomi.